Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Did the wife decide to trade her rich husband for the perfect lover? Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy it! As I walked to the cafe door, my phone pressed to my ear in one hand and my purse in the other, I didn't even think about the door. I didn't slow down as I approached. Ever since I was 15, men of all ages have constantly made fools of themselves trying to get my attention. I smiled. The funny thing was, I didn't even smile at anyone in particular, but 3 men jumped up to open the door for me. I entered the cafe and looked around, trying to find the table where my friends were sitting. Once I scanned the room, I instinctively looked in the same direction where all the guys were staring. There, I found 3 of them, a luscious beauty with raven hair, a tall, slender redhead with an enviable complexion, and a girl with dark wheat hair who called herself Abby. They were all sitting together at one table. I smiled again as I joined them. I got our waitress's attention with just a nod. She already knew what to bring me. This was especially nice because our waitress was Joanne Hart. Ashley the brunette, Eva the redhead, Betty, and I all went to school with Joanne. We've known her since my parents moved here to Texas when I was 14. We bullied her throughout school. Joanne just wasn't like us. There was something wrong with her. She was pretty enough, I suppose, but unlike us, she just didn't have the ability to use what she had to get what she wanted. Joanne was also quite stubborn about some things. Like in school, if you wanted to be a cheerleader, there were certain things you had to do. In my case, since I was dating the captain of the football team, my place on the team was a foregone conclusion. Although the head cheerleader didn't really like me back then, she knew which way the wind was blowing, and from then on, Eva and I became friends. Adding Betty and Ashley to the team was also easy. I just mentioned it to Eva, and she dealt with it. Everyone else on the team knew they would have to suck up to get on the team, and that was fair. That's how life works. People who are beautiful or rich get what they want, and everyone else is just fighting for the leftovers. Anyway, Joanne showed up for the tryouts, and after years of gymnastics and dance, she was great at all those flips and high kicks. In terms of athletic performance and dancing, she could be one of the best, if not the best, on the team. She could probably improve our team significantly in terms of performance. Unfortunately, she was terrible in terms of sycophancy during the selection process, so in the end, she didn't make the team. Some Southern belles are simply too daring for their own good. I felt sorry for her, so I approached her to offer some words of encouragement. The team coach also tried to talk to her. "Hi, Joanne," I said. "I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. With a little attitude adjustment, I'm sure you'll succeed next time." She turned to me and smiled very sweetly. "You, Connie," she replied sharply. "My name is Constance," I said. This really made me angry. My real name was Connie, but I changed it myself, although not officially. But all the teachers and even my parents called me Constance. It sounded much more sophisticated than Connie Page. Since we came here to Texas, I have become Constance Padet. I pronounce my last name Pade, as if I were French. In addition, any northern accent sounds refined in Texas. My almost blonde hair also helped me stand out, and the fact that I had a great body helped too. But ever since the cheer tryouts, my friends and I have been doing everything we can to help Joanne. In fact, we sometimes went to great lengths to help the poor girl. Like that time we had to stay up most of the night to call or text everyone in school to make sure not a single person voted for her in the class president election. The job would have been too difficult for Joanne, but she didn't know it at the time. The hardest part was convincing the nerd who was in charge of counting the votes that her close friends' votes would not be accepted, so she only got 1 vote, and everyone assumed she voted for herself. This actually created discord between Joanne and her friends. She disappeared for a while after school. She then worked at this cafe. When we started meeting here every morning before work, the other 3 girls actually worked in the shopping center next to the cafe. I didn't really need to work, but I have a job at a daycare nearby to keep me occupied during the day. It's also a great way to leave home while reassuring my husband that I'm doing everything I can to be a better wife and mother in the future. He thinks it's great that I want to work with children, and in his eyes, that means I'll be a great mother when we start having kids. What he would have to think about is if we have children. In fact, the only way I would ever have one of these dirty, smelly, attention-seeking babies is if it is absolutely necessary to save my marriage. Having a child really wouldn't be in my best interest. This would completely distort my body for months, then I would be tied to him for years. What the hell would I do with it when I wanted to go on vacation? The fact that this creature would call me mom would simply age me in the eyes of everyone who sees me. No, having children was probably not part of my life plans, even before I took a sip of the coffee Joanne placed in front of me. The other girls were already smiling and leaning forward to see if I was going to do something to poor Joanne or just let her serve us and leave without humiliating her or causing additional hassle. I was trying to think of something when I heard it, a low growl that spoke of powerful mechanical force. I looked out the window when I heard it because the sound was familiar. As I looked, a heavily modified white Mustang pulled up in front of the restaurant. The Mustang proudly sported one large blue star on the hood and each door. The man who got out of the Mustang walked into the cafe, and every head in the room turned to look at him. The man, Danford Richards, was a decorated Afghanistan war veteran, a former professional football player, and the third richest man in Texas. He was 49 years old, 6 feet tall, with graying blonde hair and steely blue eyes. Everyone who met Dan liked him. He was not the kind of person who liked to show off. He was more comfortable in jeans and cowboy boots than in a tuxedo or suit, so he wore them. Dan is the type of person who will sit down to chat with someone he meets on the street for 2 hours about fishing but won't take 15 minutes to meet with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company unless it's absolutely necessary. Even the girls at my table fell silent when Dan approached. "Honey, you left your bag on the counter again," he told me. Then he leaned down and kissed me tenderly. "See you at home tonight," he blushed when I released him. "Oh my God, that's a man," Ashley said. "You stupid," said Eve. "I can't believe you'd risk losing him for Todd Bridges." "Come on, Eve," Betty said. "You know Constance always belonged to Todd. She married Dan for safety and probably just to prove that she could win him over, but her heart and everything else was always with Todd." "Shut up, Betty," I replied sharply. I nodded toward Joanne, who was clearing dishes from the table next to ours. "Not everyone should know my affairs," I said. "But that's just Joanne," Betty laughed. "She's nobody. What can she do?" We all laughed out loud. "She's probably still mad about not making the cheerleading team," Eve exclaimed, starting another round of laughter. "My name is Robert Franklin. I'm a private detective. I was hired to follow Constance Richards. Honestly, I don't understand her. The woman from our investigative team approached her, and not one of them had anything good to say about her. The general consensus is that she is an idiot. On the other hand, I have met her husband, Dan, in person, and he has to be the nicest man on the planet. You see a lot of these rich guys playing the people's guy, but this guy isn't pretending. We also monitored him, even when he didn't know he was being watched. He would stop and talk to everyone who approached him. He is real. This guy was a professional football player who ended up going to Afghanistan. One of the guys he went to college with was there, and when he found out about it, he signed up too. He ended up being wounded quite badly and received a medal or two for some of his actions there. He doesn't like to talk about it. When you ask him about it, he simply says that he was doing his job. In any case, some important figures associated with one of the political parties, I am not at liberty to say which, think that he would be a good candidate for governor in the next election. But before they took any chances, they wanted to make sure that he and his wife were absolutely clean before God. After following him for a couple of months, we are confident that he might be a good candidate. So now we are keeping an eye on his wife. The notes that follow are my general observations of Mrs. Richards during the course of my investigation. The first thing that struck me, besides the age difference between them, he was 49 and she was 29, was how good they looked together. Richards is a striking man, but his wife is centerfold material. Why is she with a man who is much older than her? This morning, as usual, she was a little late. When she got out of her white Cadillac and went to the cafe where she had breakfast every morning, I noticed a few things about her from the very beginning. City girls seem to learn early how to open doors with just a smile. A rich old man, and she won't worry, she will dress up in lace and go out. He came to the cafe again this morning. Every time I see this man, I just faint. He must be the sweetest person on earth and probably the most handsome. I wouldn't expect him to remember it, but he did a lot for me personally. When he returned from the war, he began doing whatever he could to help other veterans and their families. On many occasions, he provided money from his own pocket to help. My case was one of these. I've loved Sam most of my life. When he signed up, my throat froze. I just knew something terrible was going to happen. In the early stages of the war, everything was fine. All the battles were won with our advanced technology, and there were even reporters there watching. Sam often laughed when I called or texted him, asking if he was in danger. He said his biggest danger would likely be if he tripped over one of the cables powering the congressman's television cameras or motorhome. Many politicians were there because it looked good on their record. Most of these guys had never served, but now they could say they had been to war. This made them more courageous. A couple of months after the initial assault began, things became more serious. The jokes stopped, and all the congressmen and reporters returned home. I also learned that our last steps before departure were successful. Sam managed to get me pregnant. When I told him about it, he was delighted. He told his entire platoon, and they congratulated us via Skype. 3 months later, in the final months of my pregnancy and going crazy with grief, I watched as they lowered the coffin containing what was left of Sam into the grave. He was buried with honors, the victim of some mechanical parts attached to an explosive device. His parents and I took it hard. Even during the funeral, it seemed like we were still in shock. It was like a joke, and we were waiting for the punchline. Even months after the funeral, we walked around with a hole in our hearts and in our lives. Sam's father never recovered. He lost his job and became a completely different person. He couldn't even look at his wife. There was a feeling that when they saw each other, they only remembered the loss. They did not see a person with whom they could share the pain. And it was just as bad for me. Since Sammy and I were never legally married, I had no status in terms of military benefits or anything else, and our daughter had no rights either since she wasn't born when Sammy died. He didn't sign her birth certificate, so she doesn't receive any benefits either. When I met Danford Richards, I was thinking about moving into a shelter for single mothers. One of the guys who served with Sammy, a disabled veteran named Paul, met Richards at the VA and told him about me. Richards wrote me a check without meeting me in person. He gave me enough money to last through the pregnancy and the first few months of Samantha's life. It was the biggest display of trust I've ever seen. Paul could have stolen the money, or it could all be a hoax. When I met Richards, I didn't expect him to actually remember my name. He probably helped hundreds of people, but he recognized me as soon as I spoke to him and even asked how the pregnancy was. When I told him how grateful I was for his help, he just shrugged and said that the whole country was honored to share in Sam's sacrifice, so any little thing he could do was a joy to him. So, seeing him again today was great. The bad side, of course, was finding out he was married to that fake Connie Page. When he came out after bringing her a luxurious briefcase that she had left at home, he turned to me. He smiled at me and said, "Hi Joanne, how's Samantha?" It just amazed me that a man I had only dated once could remember me and my daughter and care more about us than the 4 women I had known most of my life and gone through school with. Worse than finding out he was married to Connie, of course, was discovering she was cheating on him. This didn't come as much of a surprise because Connie had never been the type of woman to be faithful to anyone. The problem for me was deciding whether to tell him what I overheard or just not get involved. In many cases, people who receive bad news wanted to shoot the messenger. I decided to think carefully about this. Perhaps there was a way to tell him this without the information coming from me. And this time, I really wanted to do it for the best reasons. I wanted to do this so Danford wouldn't continue to be a victim of a woman who didn't deserve him, and not as a way to get back at Connie for what she did to me in the past. I talked to Todd while driving home. I wanted to see him so much. He constantly kicked me off. He said that we would meet, and then at the last moment, he changed his plans. He's done this to me several times in the last week. I always tried to talk to him on my mobile phone and not on my home phone. My mobile phone was in my name, and I paid the bill myself. The bill would arrive at Betty's apartment without Danford even looking at it or asking me about some of the numbers I called or received calls from frequently. Danford was quite trusting over the years of our marriage. I managed a lot, but I didn't want to go too far. He also paid for a lot of the things I did with my friends. When he had to go to England on business last summer, he sent me and my girlfriends to Jamaica. We got drunk and had fun on the islands for 7 days. The trip was supposed to last 10 days, but after a week, too many local men started following us, expecting money and more. I returned home early to avoid any awkward publicity. When Danford called that evening and found out I was coming home, he wondered why I was leaving early. "I miss you so much, I can't stand it," I said. "I'm coming home and then flying to England. I'll sit near your meeting rooms and wait for you." "But Constance," he said, "by the time you get here, it will be time for me to fly home. Why don't you just wait for me at home, and then we can go somewhere together?" I sat at home for 2 days waiting for him to return. During this time, I was fantasizing about all the guys I was with in Jamaica, both tourists and locals. I was completely satisfied with this trip. Ashley, Eva, and Betty have already asked me when we can do this again. I told them that such trips should be very rare because I could not do anything that might arouse Danford's suspicion. I guess they really couldn't understand that I really loved Danford. He's exactly the man I would like to settle down with and spend my life with someday. He is caring and kind, generous, and despite his age, very handsome. The problem we have is that I met him too early in my life. I'm not ready to settle down and make a commitment yet. I'm not ready to be a mom or a wife or anything like that yet. But on the other hand, he is too good a person to let go. It's like when you go to a store and they sell boots at a discount in the middle of summer, and you won't be wearing boots anytime soon, but you buy them and keep them until winter. Danford is my bargain boots. There will come a time when I'll be ready for him, and I'll be the best damn wife a man could ever have. But it's not time yet. That day, however, is drawing ever closer. I'm really starting to get tired of Todd's antics. Todd needs to understand that he can't treat me like he did when we were in college. I'm important now, my time is too valuable for me to wait for him. Todd is probably still mad that I didn't marry him and move into his studio apartment. He probably doesn't understand that living in his one-room apartment on the ground floor and eating canned beans and tuna wouldn't be enough for me. I actually did him a favor because we would have just started hating each other. Even if Todd had enough money to support me in the style I deserve, there would be questions about our union. Todd is a great guy today, but he's just not husband material. Danford is a very stylish man, the emphasis is on both the stylish and masculine parts of it. Todd is more of a wild boy, again, the emphasis is on both parts, the wild and the boyish. Danford is better for my future and long-term plans. Todd is great for short-term gratification and keeping you from getting bored. While Danford secures that future, both have their places and functions. Todd finally returned to the line. "Yeah, sorry, baby," he said. "I really can't meet you tonight. It's just not in the plans. Try again tomorrow." By that time, I hung up. I was so angry with him that I couldn't express it. Why the hell was I waiting for this loser when I was married to a man who would move mountains to make me happy? "Why the hell are you talking to that girl again?" Eliza screamed at me. "Didn't you entertain her enough in college?" "We were just talking, baby," I said. "Also, don't act like you're new to this. You know that if we want to get enough money to get out of this hellhole, I'll probably have to stay on good terms with her." "I don't mind if you stay on good terms with Miss Moneybags," Eliza said, "but you better not have a night with her." "Liz, the only person I want to have an intim with is you, baby," I told her, trying to calm her down. "We've been through a lot together. It's all about us. I just have to do everything I can to secure our future." "Honey, it's all about survival," she said. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to live the lifestyle we want, we're going to have to get down and dirty. We'll both have to put up with and do some things we don't like. But in the end, we will win." So, while I may not personally like Constance, I actually think she is a spoiled little girl and always has been. If I have to put up with her to get what we need, I will. If she stands between me and the goalposts, I will go through her for us. Eliza looked at me suspiciously. "Why do all your little pep talks sound like you're still playing football?" she asked as she turned to leave. My phone rang again. I answered it. "What do you want, Todd?" I asked. The voice was Ernie Marinelli. My blood ran cold listening to his voice. I'd been trying to talk to him for weeks. This man could make or break my future. Todd, I don't have the whole damn day, I said. Mr. Marinelli, I want to arrange a purchase, I said. He laughed into the phone. Todd, we don't work with people of your caliber, he spat. In fact, the people we work with don't operate at your level. All this 5-cent stuff is childish, too much risk for too little reward. But I want to level up, sir, I said. Look, Todd, the minimum order I can accept is $50,000, he said. But you don't have it. Okay, I want 50, I said. Todd, there's a lot of goods here, he said slowly. Your profit after payout will be almost 4 times larger, and I'll double the next order. Let me check my inventory and arrange delivery, he said. I'll call you back. And Todd, if this deal doesn't go through, if you're just yanking my chain. No, I said seriously. This will be the end of the Todd saga. Then the phone went dead. Oh God, I was in trouble. I was sure that his minimum amount would be $20,000. $50,000 is more than double what I got from loans from other small merchants and from everything I managed to save myself. I needed to find $30,000 quickly. I was sure that Marinelli would need 2 or 3 days to put everything together. Even if this hadn't happened, I couldn't have waited that long. Where the hell was I going to get the rest of the money? Then it dawned on me. Constance could probably pull $30,000 out of her budget on fancy lingerie and not even think about it. I tried not to take it personally, but this time I couldn't. I sat in my office, staring at the screen in front of me. My next appointment was 2 hours away, and I was confused. I thought I heard a soft knock on the door, but I wasn't sure. Besides, what I was watching was a matter of life and death. So this is what the third richest man in Texas does all day, said a quiet voice behind me. I turned around and almost dropped my controller in surprise. Joanne, right? I said. I'm between meetings. You're playing a video game, she said, smiling. This is Skyrim? I said, trying to explain. Okay, she said, dubiously. This is a party at the Falmer Embassy, I said, trying to explain. It's still a video game, she chuckled. But this is Skyrim, I said. How are you today? She asked. Well, I was depressed when I came here, she said. Then I found you playing video games on a TV which is bigger than most of the walls in my house. I shrugged. I waited outside your office door for quite a long time, she said. Don't you have a secretary or assistant? She got married last week, and today is my first day back, I said. I haven't yet managed to find someone to take her place. Mr. Richards, you helped me more than I can ever repay you, she began. Don't worry about it, Joanne, I interrupted her. But it makes everything so difficult, she said. I don't want you to hate me, but I have some very bad news for you. And I don't want you to think that I'm saying this out of revenge or some belated vendetta. I smiled at her and shook my head. Joanne, just say it. Mr. Richards, she began again. Call me Dan, I said. Everyone says that, Dan, she said. How much do you make at the cafe? $8.50 an hour, she said. But I came here to. What did you study for in college? Are you good with computers? Humanities, and I'm great with computers, she said. I said. I don't know how we can use the humanities, but how about $16 an hour, full benefits, and free kindergarten? Great, she said. But great, tomorrow you can start working as my new assistant. The first thing I want you to do is go online and figure out how I can get out of this party or what I need to do to move on to the next fight. Okay, I asked. She nodded, but I started quietly. I know, she said. You came here to warn me that my current wife is cheating on me. Her eyes became softer, and she nodded. Don't worry, Joe, I said. About an hour ago, a private detective hired by a political action committee I've never heard of came to see me. He told me that his political committee would like to consider me as a candidate for governor. They spent months researching my affairs and family life and thought I would be an excellent candidate. There was only one problem: I have a cheating wife. I saw photos and videos, everything was there. On the one hand, I was ready to sue for an unwarranted and illegal invasion of privacy. On the other hand, I asked them to continue the investigation until I decide what to do. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Are you thinking about consultations or about confronting her and getting her to stop doing it?" "No, Joanne," I said. "I think I have a flaw. I tend to accept people as they are. I trust everyone until they give me a reason not to. And when I fall in love, it's even worse." "When I married Constance," "Her name is Connie," Joanne interjected. "She calls herself Constant because it sounds more sophisticated. When I married her, I was so enamored with her that all I saw was eternity. Against the advice of my financial advisors and lawyers, I did not force her to sign a prenuptial agreement. I'm worth almost $1 billion, and I don't see the point in giving her half. So, unless she commits a felony, I'm stuck with her until I find a way to get rid of her. But I'm working on it." I smiled. "And in the coming days, if you happen to run into her, which is unlikely since she never comes into the office, please don't let her know that I'm aware of her activities. She won't hear it from me." "Hey, I have a new job," Joanne said. "I need to tell Sammy about this. She will be delighted, I think." "And free kindergarten, you said?" "Free kindergarten. And I need to tell my boss at the cafe that I'm leaving. Can I work there one more day and see you on Monday? It wouldn't be good to leave her until tomorrow without help." Suddenly, her face darkened. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I don't have clothes for this kind of work," she said. I took the phone and dialed the number. I said a few words into the phone and handed her the card. "This is a women's clothing store in which the company has a stake. We have an account there. They will pick out clothes for you to wear to work. Of course, you will get a significant discount on the clothes, and the cost will be deducted from your salary until it is paid." I stopped because Joanne was looking at me as if she wanted to eat me. "See you Monday, boss," she said, and she left. When I walked into the cafe the next morning, I knew something had changed. The men were still looking at me as I walked to our table. I couldn't understand what was going on. I looked across the room and locked eyes with Joanne. She turned away from me and continued going about her business. She'll pay for it later, I thought. I sat down and started talking with my friends. "You look out of place," Ashley said. "Oh," Betty said. "Danford must have worn you out last night." "Betty, you always think that every night someone is night to death," Eve sighed. "Well, I only have my personal experience to rely on," Betty said, smiling like a Cheshire cat. "That's probably the problem," I said. "I couldn't meet Todd yesterday. He made me so angry that I finally hung up. And when Dan came home, he didn't want me either. This was the first time since we got married that we didn't have an intimate when I wanted it." "Oh hell," Betty said. "Alone and unloved. Who would have thought?" "Shut up, Betty," Eve said sharply. "She feels bad." I looked around and waved to Joanne. She looked at me and began to approach our table. "What's wrong with her today?" I asked. "Good morning, ladies," Joanne said. "Where's my coffee?" I asked. "Did you order coffee?" Joanne asked. "Don't start with me today," I replied sharply. "I'm not in the mood for this." "Well then, please let me know when you're in the mood to order," Joanne smiled. "Just get my damn coffee now." "Do you need coffee during intim?" she asked. She had the stupidest smile on her face. I didn't understand what she was talking about or asking. "Joanne, do you want me to get you fired?" I asked sharply. She shrugged and looked at me. "You can't do this," she said. "You don't own this restaurant, and you have nothing to do with the people who own it. But you can try. It's not like I need a reason to beat you." She left me and went to serve other clients. Eve came up to her and talked. Joanne nodded her head and wrote something down. "Constance, maybe you shouldn't try to please two men," Ashley said. "I'm serious. When we were in school and college, Todd was normal. But if you look at him now, he looks kind of sloppy. He's not in your league anymore. He's shorter than you, it's kind of embarrassing. He doesn't have much of a future. I think you still see him as the boy you knew. You're still living the way he was when we were all younger and our potential was limitless. Since then, most of us have realized our potential. I mean, look at you. You are as beautiful as everyone always knew you would be. You're smart, handsome, and married to one of the richest men in the state, if not the country. People are wondering when you will run for office. Hell, Danford might even become president of the United States one day. He's tall, he's considerate, and he loves you like there's no tomorrow. But you're sitting here wishing for a guy with no job, no prospects, and no assets who treats you like you're worthless. I do not understand this. Maybe I love them both, I said. I love Danford because I need to. If I want to maintain the lifestyle I have, like you said, he loves me. He will do anything for me. There were times when he would be in the middle of a meeting with diplomats from other countries he does business with or executives of multi-million-dollar companies when he would apologize and leave the table so I could send him photos of the shoes I was thinking about. Danford is trapped by the fact that he loves me so much that it gives me control over him. Todd, on the other hand, is wild and unpredictable. I have no control over Todd. He does whatever he wants. He tells me that he loves me too, but he is so unpredictable that every minute spent with him is valuable. When I'm with Todd, I feel the same way I felt when I was in college. I feel like my whole life is ahead of me. This all sounds really stupid to me, Ashley said. It's really stupid because it's a fantasy left over from when we were barely adults. The reality is that you've grown up, and with your husband's money, you really have the world at your feet. And one more thing, if Todd loves you so much, where is he when you need him? Most of the time, he sits in some bar drinking and smoking, but you have to practically beg him to give you time. Constance, I'm your friend, but I think it's time to let go of the baby stuff and start working on your marriage. What do you mean? I asked. When your husband doesn't want night, especially with someone who looks like you, it could be a sign that something serious is going on. It could be something unimportant, perhaps he was just tired or busy. But it could also mean that he has a health problem. In the worst case scenario for you, he may be tired of you and may be getting ready to find someone else. I looked at her as if she was crazy. Constance, you're beautiful and all, but honey, there's always someone more beautiful, even if it's just in a different way. Behind every successful man, there is usually a woman. Behind every beautiful woman, there is usually some guy who is tired of her. If intimate is the only thing you give Danford, he's probably had his fill of it. I knew what she was trying to tell me, but I saw it differently. I was thinking about this when Joanne returned to the coffee table. She placed the cup in front of Ashley, I placed one in front of Eve, she placed the cup and donut in front of Betty, and then placed the other cup in front of me. Joanne, I know you're stupid. I screamed. But don't you see what's wrong here, you Connie, she said. I was amazed. Joanne, you damn waitress, now bring me my damn coffee right now. I snapped. She took the cup and began to walk around the table. Then she tripped and spilled coffee on my new pink dress. I was sure she did it on purpose. I stood up and started screaming. The plump man who stood at the cash register and ran the cafe ran up to our table. She spilled this coffee on my dress, I said. This dress is unique. It costs more than $3,000. I'm sure it was an accident, he said. The cafe will pay the cost of cleaning it. This dress cannot be cleaned, I said, and she did it on purpose. Did you do it on purpose, Joanne? He asked. I don't remember, she said, smiling. She screamed at me and threatened to fire me. Joanne and the manager smiled at each other. Again, I had the same guess as when I entered. She did it on purpose, I said. Joanne, it wasn't on purpose, was it? He asked. I'm not sure, Joanne said. I think not, because if it was on purpose, it would be more like this. She took a piece of cherry pie from the plate she was carrying and pressed it into my face, then spun it around. That was on purpose, she said. So maybe the coffee was an accident or something like that. Joanne, you're fired, the manager said, smiling. Finish your shift and then leave. Okay, Joanne said. She walked away like it didn't matter to her. I stood there with pie on my face and coffee dripping on my new dress. Eve looked at me and started laughing. Betty and Ashley also turned away to avoid laughing. Eve moved away from the table to stop laughing. "Well, you're done with her," Ashley said. "But Constance, I don't think that's good. You know she has a small child to look after, and you just put her out of work. You probably have 10 of these dresses. It was just a case of both of you having a bad day at the same time. You always bullied her, and maybe she just didn't want to put up with it today." "No, that's not the point," said Eve, returning to the table. "Look behind the counter. Do you see the sign? The sign says, 'Good luck, Joe.' Today is Joanne's last day at work here. She got a better job. She just played a prank on you to get revenge for all the dirty tricks you did to her." At that moment, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw that the call was from Todd. I answered the phone. "Hey baby, can you get off work today?" he asked. "Why should I do this?" I asked. "Well, I was thinking about what you told me yesterday," he said. "And I probably have to admit that you're right. I got so caught up in trying to find a job or start a career that I lost sight of the reason why I was trying so hard. The main reason I need to do this is because I have always been competitive, and I just can't bear to think about my girlfriend being married to some rich old man. I think instead of just wanting to spend time with you, I was trying to make a ton of money to catch up with him and get you back. Last night after you hung up, I realized that the ultimate goal is for us to be together. So while it's still important to me to make enough money to support you in the style you deserve, what's most important is that we do this together." "That's the smartest thing you've said in a long time, Todd," I said. "So why don't you meet me somewhere and we'll spend the whole day together," he said. "I just need to call and go home to change." I said I spent the whole day with Todd. We talked a lot while we were driving. It was the same thing we did when we were in college. We ended up at the motel. I constantly felt like something was missing. Then I realized that something was happening to him. "Spit it out, Todd," I said. He looked at me strangely. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking away. "Todd, there's something wrong here," I said. "I have a feeling that you're not telling me something." "Well, there are two things," he said. "But I want to tell you only about one of them." I looked at him seriously. "Todd, the second thing is my problem, not yours." "Well, let's start with the first one," I said. He took a small ring from his pocket. It looked shabby. The small stone in it seemed insignificant in size, color, and clarity compared to the ring I wore on my left hand. "Will you marry me, Constance?" he asked. The fire in his eyes was hypnotic. "But Todd," I started. "I know you're married to Mr. Money," he said, "but he doesn't love you the way I do. I'm working on an idea, and although I won't be as rich as him, I can support you. So when I realize my dream, will you divorce him and be with me forever?" I looked at the small, cheap ring he was holding in front of me. This was the answer to all my problems rolled into one. This would legally bind Todd to me, and I would be with a man who doesn't love me enough for me to control him. There was something attractive about this thought. "Yes, I will marry you," I said, "as soon as your idea works. I will divorce Stanford and marry you." "So you love me more than him?" he asked. I knew that men always need to hear that they are winning. They need to know that they are better at everything. "Yes, Todd," I said. "I love you more." I really had to pay attention to what was going on around me. There were a couple of guys not far from us who were taking pictures of a woman in a swimsuit, but they also had cameras pointed at us. I also should have noticed the smile on Todd's face. I think what I did that day was just to keep the wheel turning. Intim with Todd really wasn't that good. It lasted a long time, but it wasn't good. I chalked it up to my residual anger at Joanne's actions preventing me from relaxing and enjoying myself, but probably this was also due to feelings of guilt. Ashley's advice kept coming back to me. I wished she was here so I could tell her how wrong she was. Of course Stanford loved me, but obviously Todd did too. "So, Todd, what else is bothering you so much?" I said. "Like I said, I have a great idea that will eventually make me a fortune," he said. "I've worked hard and attracted investors, but I'm still a little short of initial capital. I could probably find the rest of the money, but then I would have to attract more investors, and this would not leave me in control of the project or the company. How much do you need? I asked. Only about $330,000, he said. If I can find $30,000, will you give me a share in the company? I asked. To be honest, I liked the idea because it meant I would have my own source of income and not be beholden to Todd or Danford. I was confident that I could get the money from Danford or one of our accounts without too much trouble. In fact, I was sure that I had an idea how to get money from Danford without his knowledge and then return it. How long do I have to find the money? I asked. Oh, a couple of days, he said. When I returned home that night, I was a little late. Danford acted as if he didn't notice. I was sure he was just glad I was back, but in the back of my mind, there was a feeling that something had changed. There was something different in the way he looked at me. Usually, when he looked at me, it was strange. But he looked the same way as he looked at his Mustang Lone Star. That night, he just looked at me and had a polite conversation. It didn't look like he was angry with me. When he got angry, for example, if I went out with friends in an area he considered too dangerous or wore clothes he considered too revealing, Danford would usually leave the house until his anger subsided. He went out in his car, and when he returned, he was usually calmer. Anyway, Danford didn't treat me like he was angry with me. That was different. As we ate dinner, I told him about my day. As always, he was really interested, but it seemed like a different interest. He usually listened to find out what I was doing, and if someone did something to hurt me, he would ask me if I wanted him to do something about it. When I told him about Joanne and what she did to me, there was no reaction on his face. In fact, I got the impression that he found it funny. Dan, are you going to do something with her? I asked. Why? He asked. You handled it yourself. You fired her. I was watching TV alone. This was the first time. We usually did everything together or went somewhere or went for a drive or just sat and talked. It looks like Dan had some work he didn't have time to finish at the office that he needed to deal with at home. This was not new. It had happened several times when he had a very important deal. There were even a couple of times when he wanted me to sit next to him and hold his hand while he looked over contracts. I thought it was cute. Danford went to bed very late. He also didn't turn to me like he usually did when I woke up in the morning. He was no longer there. It was the sound of his Mustang starting that let me know he was out of bed. This was another misunderstanding. Danford had several cars. He had enough money to drive whatever he wanted. He told me there was something special about Mustangs that he really loved. For him, this car represented cowboys, freedom, and America in a way that no other car could. Muscle cars were a uniquely American thing. Many countries and companies around the world produced very good sedans, sports cars, economy cars, or SUVs. But there was something special about these flash, powerful sports cars that had too much horsepower and were only good for driving very fast in a straight line. I jumped out of bed and called his mobile. Darling, today is Saturday. Where are you going? I asked. I have business to deal with, he replied. I thought you'd go shopping with your girlfriends or go out with friends. In some ways, I was grateful for this time. It made what I needed to do easier. But something still bothered me. I took a shower and got dressed, then I called Andy Summers. He was Dan's financial genius, Stuart Copeland was Dan's lawyer, and Gordon Sooner handled everything related to our finances. Andy, I know it's Saturday, I said, and I know it's early, but I need to talk to you about something. I'll meet you in my office in 20 minutes. Sure, he said. The tone of his voice was familiar to me, the I hate to do this, but since my boss admires you, I'll have to fawn over you to keep my job tone. Thanks, Andy, I said. He was already in his office when I entered, wearing cargo shorts and a polo. Apparently, he had plans for the day when I called. I hope I'm not distracting you from anything, I said. Just an outing with the kids, he said. If we go later, we'll just stay longer. Well, I said, I have a plan for a surprise for Danford's birthday. I want to buy him a car. But it will be a surprise. As you know, Shelby is making a very limited number of 1,000-horsepower Mustangs just for this year, and I want to get one of them for Dan. Great idea, he said. Dan is crazy about Mustangs, so I need $30,000 for a down payment, I said. But you can't let Danford know that. When do you need the money? He asked. I'll temporarily increase the limit on your credit card, but it will take a few hours. I may not be able to do it until Monday, Andy said. Sweetly, I leaned towards him, making sure he had a good view of my chest. You know, Danford checks my credit card statements and makes sure I don't go over budget. What Andy didn't know was that if I went over budget, Danford would simply use that as an excuse to punish me and then give me more money. It was just a game. So what should we do? He asked. Give me the money in cash, I said. He looked doubtful, so I pouted. It will take a few hours on Monday morning, he said. I should be able to do this by 10 in the morning. Come here then. Thanks, Andy, I said. The car will take a few months to build depending on where we are on the list, but we should have it by Dan's birthday. Have fun with the kids. I left the office and headed to the mall to meet Ashley and Eva. Nobody knew where Betty slept. So, have you gotten your daily dose of intim? Ashley asked. You seem happier in a way. I spent time at the motel yesterday with Todd, I said. Ashley, Eva said loudly, I thought we decided you'd focus on your marriage instead of giving freebies to losers. It's good that you're helping the homeless, Constance, Ashley continued, but if you don't break up with him, you'll end up on the streets yourself when Danford kicks you out the door. How is it? Ashley asked Eva. Okay, I said, but the main thing is that Todd has an idea that can bring us a lot of money. I'm tired of depending on men for income. It's time for me to earn money myself. What's the idea? Ashley asked. I looked at her, confused. I'm not entirely sure, I said, but he said it would make us a lot of money in a short time. Constance, you and him never change, Ashley said. I thought you had matured and become smarter. What, Ash? I asked. I thought you were my friend. I'm your friend, she said. I love you, honey, like a sister. But even in the old days, you were known for planning things and forgetting most of the details. Remember the cheerleader party where you rented a venue, hired a band, printed tickets, sold them, and then discovered that 5 minutes after people arrived, we had no food or alcohol? And Todd was known for his get-rich-quick schemes where he never got rich or quick. Working with Todd was like throwing money down the toilet, only you don't get splashed and you don't even hear that cool flushing sound. I'm just saying, you may not be seeing the whole picture. She paused, then continued, don't forget, the intim wasn't great, Eve interjected. The rest of the weekend passed without incident. Danford spent Sunday washing the car, and I was sure something was wrong. On Sunday, I washed my car. Sundays were usually my favorite days of the week. More often than not, Constance and I would lie in bed together and not get up until lunchtime. We have lunch at one of our favorite restaurants and just enjoy each other's company without thinking about work or other responsibilities. It was a day just for us. But this Sunday, I got up early and left bed. I left and went to the restaurant to have breakfast. It turned out that the restaurant was the same cafe where Constance had breakfast every morning. I wondered why I chose this place, and then I realized, I guess I was looking for a familiar face. Then I remembered that Joanne didn't work here anymore, now she works for me and I will see her tomorrow. I decided that I would call her later that day to see how she was feeling and if she had everything she needed to start work tomorrow. After breakfast, I returned home, and fortunately, Constance was not yet awake. I left the car outside the garage and prepared everything needed to wash it. I wandered around the house for a while, waiting for Constance to wake up. The idea was that as soon as I heard her get up, I would go out and wash the car. This way, I had something to do to avoid spending time with her. Over the past few days, my feelings for her had changed from mad love to pure insanity. I had achieved a lot in life without lamenting over spilled milk. I knew that I loved Constance, and now I understood that she most likely did not reciprocate my feelings. I was almost twice her age, and I was sure that money played a big role in the modern world, even when it came to love. Money always matters, and although I didn't like to admit it, money was now a factor for me too. I wanted to run up the stairs, grab Constance by the hair, drag her ass out of the house, and kick her out, but I couldn't. I wanted to force her to admit who she slept with, but I couldn't. The private detectives hired by PAC gave me all the information from their investigation. I hired them to continue gathering evidence that I could use to keep most of my assets in a divorce. So, I actually knew who she slept with. I actually knew he wasn't the first and only, but he seemed to be the one she couldn't give up. Some news shocked me greatly. In the end, it didn't matter how many there were or how long she stayed with them. The only thing that mattered was getting rid of this situation while preserving as much of my fortune as possible. Revenge could wait in the wings. Then my cell phone rang. I answered and spoke quietly into the phone. I didn't want the sound of my voice in the house to wake her. "Dan, are you alone?" asked Andy Summers. "Yes, Andy." "What happened?" I said. "Okay, I have a problem of a delicate nature," he said. "You and I have always been friends outside of our work relationship, and my loyalty is first and foremost to the trust you have placed in me. Your wife asked me to do something on her behalf for you and not tell you. She wants to buy you something expensive for your birthday and not tell you about the money. Constance has an unlimited Visa Black Card, right?" I said, "Why would she even ask you?" "Because she needs the money in cash, and tomorrow," he said. "How much does it cost?" I asked. $330,000, he said. I smiled. It seemed to me that Constance was planning to run away with her lover. If she did, everything would be easier. Once she left, I could file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and then change the locks and revoke her security access so that even if she changed her mind or tried to confuse me, she couldn't come back. "Give it to her," I said cheerfully, "but make sure you give her bills with sequential numbers that are easy to track." "Of course, sir," he said. "Please don't let Mrs. Richards know what I told you. It's supposed to be a surprise for your birthday." Not a word about it. Even when I hung up, I smiled. Things were looking up. It seemed that I could get rid of the cheater sooner than I thought. If I couldn't get a divorce based on abandonment, I might be able to charge her with embezzlement or theft. Even in a marriage, one partner cannot simply take money from the other's accounts without permission. It's still considered theft. I could either force her to agree to a quick divorce under the threat of criminal charges being filed against her and her family, or in the worst-case scenario, I could actually prosecute her and put her in jail. Theft of that amount of money would be considered a criminal offense. So, putting her in jail would allow me to divorce her and keep everything. My mood improved significantly. I called a private detective agency and told them what was going on. They asked to meet with me because they were sure that Constance was not doing what I thought. They had tapes of her dates with her old university sweetheart, and they were sure they knew what was going on. They wanted to sit down and compare notes later in the day. If we put all our information together, they were confident that we could come up with a better plan. I could hardly wait. A few minutes later, Constance appeared, leaning against the doorway and softly saying my name. "Danford, when did you get up?" she asked. "I woke up, and you were gone," I said. I got up a few hours ago," I said. "I have a meeting later with someone from the company I work with." "Would you like to have breakfast together?" she asked, leaning forward. It was quite obvious that the short, thin nightgown she was barely wearing was her only clothes. Since she didn't sleep in it, she obviously wore it solely to tease or seduce me. "Sorry, I've already eaten," I said. "I stopped by the cafe. Your friend Joanne doesn't work there anymore. Did you come this far to check it out for me?" She smiled. "Actually, I'm just hungry," I said. "So, do you want me to go to the meeting with you? I could just sit there and show off for you until you're done, and then maybe we could spend time together," she said. I've been in business long enough to know when someone is trying to get something from me or hide their intentions. I decided to withdraw. "I tried to spend time with you on Friday," I said. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, I went to the kindergarten and looked for you everywhere, but you were not there. I was sure that you had gone to work. You told me about it at dinner." I could almost hear her suck in her breath. Of course, I was bluffing, but I knew from the private investigators that she was not at work on Friday, so she had no way of knowing whether I was there or not. "Did you talk to anyone there?" she asked. It wasn't a pressing moment. I needed to wait for her to take the money or leave, so I backed off. If I ran into her now, all I'd get would be a run-of-the-mill divorce and the satisfaction of seeing half of everything I've worked so hard for go away from my life, so I gave her the opportunity to use it. "No, I didn't talk to anyone," I said. I was so upset that I didn't see that I just left. Usually, if I look around all the rooms, I find you. My favorite thing is to see you sitting on the rug with all the kids gathered around you while you read to them. I always imagined that someday we would have children, and you would read to them just like you. You would be the most beautiful, most special mother in the world. Our children would be as beautiful as you, and they would have my spirit, and they would love you almost as much as I do." She recoiled. She didn't know what to say. She just looked at me, and I think I saw a tear starting to form in the corner of her eye. I kept a neutral expression. It was really hard to stop myself from raising my fist in the air. I was really proud of myself because I could apparently smear nonsense just as thick as she could. "I love you too, Danford," she said quietly. "Next time you come downtown looking for me, just ask one of the women where I am. I had to go get supplies on Friday. We needed diapers and formula for the babies. Believe it or not, I'm one of the few women out there who has a reliable car, so I go shopping a lot, Danny. Maybe when you're done with this deal, we should take a vacation. Maybe we could just go on a long trip somewhere." "Sounds like a plan," I said. "I know I've been unusually busy lately, so taking a break will be good. But what will you do about your job, Constance? You don't have much vacation time left, and I thought you were going to save it for another trip with the girls." "Honey, maybe it's time for me to stop taking care of other people's children and start having my own," she said. "Agreed," I replied. The funny thing is that she touched me when she said it. I waited so long to hear this from her that it really touched me. "What about a cruise?" she suggested. Perhaps I was angry because she touched me, but I almost gave myself away. My acting skills were obviously not up to par because I almost screwed up. "That would be great," I said. "I'll book a cabin tomorrow." She looked at me for a second and then asked, "Do we both need tickets?" "Honey, you know what I meant," I said. "There are no tickets on a cruise. You book a cabin and just tell them how many people will be there." She nodded her head and returned to the house. I finished washing and waxing my car and went to meet the private investigator. We had an interesting conversation. I was amazed at the amount of information they had collected. The private investigator, whose name was Abner Yakum, suggested that we should share some of the information we had obtained with some of his friends. He swore that I would be very pleased with the results. He told me that I needed to be very sure of what I wanted because once they started, there would be no way to stop. Some of his words made me wonder if he had ever been in my shoes. In fact, by the end of our conversation, I was sure that he was going through his own situation. He gradually moved away from using expressions like "resolve the situation with your wife." By the end of our conversation, he was saying to roast her well and mentioned a scorched earth policy towards her and everyone on her side. Since I only had a vague idea of how to handle the situation, I was glad for his help. But I hoped for his sake that he would get some kind of psychological help after this was all over. Revenge wasn't really on my agenda. I just wanted to get away from her and protect most of my assets. But on the way home, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of inflicting a little pain on those who had wronged me. I really didn't have anything against Todd. Damn, Constance is a beautiful woman. If I were him, I would probably try to win her over too. In fact, I did it. Todd knew Constance long before I did, but when I met her, she told me that she had no one. I think they went through periods of on and off in the relationship, and when we met, they were on a break. Perhaps the real reason I wasn't as angry as I could have been was that she never brought that man to our house. It would be insulting. In fact, if she had just come up to me and said, "Dan, I discovered that I still have feelings for my longtime boyfriend Todd," I would have wished them luck. We could part ways as friends, and I would allow her to keep all the clothes and jewelry she had accumulated during our marriage, and perhaps even a token amount of money. But her decision to be dishonest and play with me hurt me. Her further decision to sneak around with him and steal my money to give it to him crossed the line. It will take me time to get over it. I may never love someone the way I loved her again in my entire life, but I will also never be so naive again. In fact, I'm not sure I'll ever want anyone else in my life after her. On Monday morning, I followed my usual routine. I got out of bed and took a shower. I woke Constance up so she could start her day too. She came and kissed me. After she got dressed, I sat in the kitchen eating a light breakfast of fruit and a cup of coffee. She sat down opposite me and smiled. "Have a nice day, Constance," I said. "I'm not leaving yet," she smiled. "I thought I'd have lunch with you instead of going to the cafe." "Great idea," I said, "but bad timing. I'm leaving in a few minutes. I need to choose my new assistant." "You have plenty of secretaries in your steno pool," she smiled. "Make sure you choose someone old and ugly. It will be good if she is also fat." She leaned over and kissed me again, then left the house. My day at work was exciting. I had several deals in progress, and just managing my various businesses and concerns on a daily basis was busy. There were always decisions to be made and meetings to be scheduled. The most exciting part was watching Joanne walk into the office holding her daughter's hand. Samantha was a real charm. She came up to me, extended her 4-year-old hand, and thanked me for making her mom happy again. For most of the day, all I remembered were her chubby cheeks and that little hand. Joanne looked good and seemed like a combination of a stylish businesswoman and the girl next door. By mid-afternoon, she was already scheduling my appointments as if she had been doing this all her life. She tried to talk to me several times to express her gratitude for the work, and I just nodded my head and told her that she was already doing a great job. When it was time to go home, I was not ready for it. I knew the scenario for the next few hours, and it didn't bode well. When Dan got home, I had already changed into jeans and a t-shirt that showed off my chest. I decided that instead of our chef cooking us dinner, we should just go out into the backyard and grill something, just the two of us. Then I could convince him to make love to me. It had been a few days since we had a night, and I needed to get us back on track, business deal or not. Ashley was supposed to call me later. Her call would be my excuse to leave. Maybe I wanted to have an intimate with Dan before going to Todd because I felt guilty. Maybe I wanted to compare them to see which one I liked better. Both had their advantages and disadvantages. Todd had the stamina of youth, but he had as much grace as a freight train. He was also a very selfish lover. But for some reason, I just couldn't give him up. I knew he was bad for me, but I just couldn't control it. Danford, on the other hand, loved me. This was undeniable. So I wanted Danford to be first because for now, he was my husband. And maybe if I had a night with him enough, I wouldn't have to feel so guilty about giving Todd too. It would be as if Danford let someone else play with his toys when he was done with them. Well, that was the plan, but things didn't go the way I wanted. Dan walked in and immediately went to his office. He opened his briefcase and sat down in front of the computer in his home office. He took out several stacks of papers and immediately began sorting through them. I walked in and reminded him of our no work from home rule. He reluctantly looked away from the screen. He came out with me and lit the grill, then sat there flipping steaks. I was sure something was wrong. My feminine intuition was screaming. I felt like the barrel-shaped robot from Lost in Space was locked inside my head and screaming, "Danger, Will Robinson." I've been used to men looking at me most of my life. I was nervous when they didn't look at me. Danford always looked at me. He usually smiled when looking at me. It was as if a famous critic were looking at a painting he may have seen 1,000 times but still loved looking at, finding different nuances every time. No, it's more like how Danford looked at his car. Anyway, tonight he looked at me like I was a bug crawling slowly across the floor in front of him. As soon as I got within the reach of his leg, he would crush me. And there were other things that didn't add up. I could have believed that Danford was busy or perhaps physically exhausted from working on a new deal, so we didn't have intimate. But he hadn't even kissed me in days. He let me kiss him, but he hadn't kissed me for a long, long time. It looked like both of us were waiting for Ashley to call. When the phone rang, we both jumped. I answered, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that," I said. "Are you okay?" I looked at Danford and shrugged, holding up one finger to let him know that I would only speak for a minute. "Take your time," he said, walking back into the house and out of sight. I hoped that he would stay and listen to my conversation, but this plan also failed. I pretended to talk for a while longer and then went to look for him around the house. I found him in his office, looking through papers again. "Dan, I need to leave for the evening," I said, supporting an old friend who was feeling down. "Okay," he said cheerfully. I didn't realize it at the time, but what he said and the expression on his face just didn't match. His voice sounded cheerful, almost sarcastic, but the expression on his face was sad. He really didn't seem to want me to leave. "If it's just for one evening, honey," I said, "we have a lot of nights like this. We have our whole lives ahead of us to be together. Besides, you need to finish this deal so we can go on the cruise." He nodded his head and looked away from me as I stood over him. Maybe I'm wrong, but I swear I saw a tear forming in the corner of his eye. I changed my clothes and headed to my car. After I left our territory, I stopped and got out of the car. I checked the trunk and the briefcase with the money was still there. I opened it and looked at the money. When I was little, $30,000 seemed like a lot of money. It actually looked much bigger than it actually is. There were 300 new $100 bills. It was a pittance for Danford, whose net worth was almost $1 billion, but for Todd, it was enough to secure his, or perhaps our, future. As I looked at the money, I realized that I was at a crossroads. When I was with Danford, I was sure that I loved him. I was even more sure that he loved me. But when I was away from Dan, my life seemed incomplete and boring. Todd was exciting and unpredictable. Being with him made me feel young again. I think lately I've been wondering why I was even dating Todd since the night really wasn't that good. Now I have the answer. Of course, I'm not an old woman yet, but being with Todd made me feel the way I used to feel. Danford once told me that in business, sometimes you have to take risks to get what you want. Todd wasn't really a risk to my marriage. I realized that I would never leave Danford for Todd. Ashley was wrong about this. I think Ashley really believed that I would leave Danford for Todd. Perhaps what I said made her think that way. What I had with Danford was forever. Eventually, I would get settled and we would have kids and everything else that people do. Danford would be a wonderful father. Todd would probably be the most selfish and terrible father. But for now, it was just fun. And maybe I wasn't in love with Todd, but I was addicted to the way he made me feel. I got back into the car and headed to Todd's apartment. I watched as the lights of my car disappeared into the darkness. I took out my phone and dialed the number. "Yes, she's on her way," I said. I turned off the phone and stood up from the chair in which I was sitting. I wiped away the last tear, hoping it was the last tear I would ever shed for Constance, and headed toward my garage. It wasn't a night to be noticed or make noise, so I decided to drive my Volt. I bought this car purely for the novelty of having a mostly electric car. Until Ford comes out with one or I can get a Tesla, this one should do. Although I left shortly after Constance left, I knew that I would get there before she did. She was terrible at navigation and she drove like an old lady. For Constance, being so young, she had many of the characteristics of older women. Her slow ride was just one of them. Her forgetfulness was legendary. I often had to carry things to her that she forgot on the way to work. As I pulled up and entered the back of the building, the agents in the apartment down the hall from Todd waved at me. "Hey, you're just in time. Listen to this," one said. "Damn it, Todd, I knew you just wanted intimate with that," the woman said. "It's all about this, isn't it?" "You must think I'm stupid, baby," Dan said. "I don't even like night with her," Todd complained. "I'm doing this for you." "I'm just doing this for the money," Todd said. "So why did you invite her here?" the woman asked. "Because, baby, I need this money," Todd said. "We need it. I'm tired of being small and barely making ends meet. I stole and saved everything I could to buy $20,000 worth of products from Marinelli. I finally contacted him a few days ago, and he said that the minimum purchase he would accept was $50,000. That gave me 2 or 3 days to find twice as much as I had. The only person I could get $30,000 from so quickly is Constance. Her husband probably spends more on dinners without even noticing to improve our lives, Liv. I need to make this deal, and since I ordered a product from Marinelli, if I don't provide the money, I'll be dead. He's not a man to be trifled with. Sometimes if you outplay him, your family pays the price. Other times he just smears you through the streets as an example for others that he's not someone to mess with. So why can't you just borrow money from her as a loan? Asked Eliza. Baby, I can't help it. She's fascinated by me, Todd said. I actually hope she doesn't want to have an intim, but if she wants it, I'll just have to do it for you and for us. Not that I liked it, one of the investigators laughed. Can you believe this guy? Asked one of the employees. His line of charm is longer than the street he lives on. Yeah, and his girlfriend has to be one of the dumbest women I've ever met, said another. Hey Dan, apparently your old lady is too stretched out for poor old Todd. What did you do with her? He asked. Oh, sorry man, I keep forgetting that this is your first time. I've been divorced 3 times. After a while, you don't care anymore. At least you'll get some payback, I nodded. It actually didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I already knew that Todd wasn't the first guy Constance cheated on me with. In fact, based on what he told his woman, she apparently cheated on him too. Well, this will all end soon for me. We settled down to watch the hidden cameras they had installed in Todd's apartment. From what Todd told Eliza, Constance was supposed to be at his house by 9:30, and the goods were supposed to be delivered by 11 o'clock that evening. At least they won't have much time for night, I said. We sat down to watch. Eliza paced around the apartment, swearing in Spanish, and Todd looked out the window every few minutes. When Constance finally arrived, Todd kissed Eliza and pulled her out of the apartment before letting Constance in. From the hallway cameras, we could see that Constance and Eliza actually passed each other in the hallway without even realizing it. Constance walked into Todd's apartment and looked around. Todd immediately hugged her. He seemed to be the one initiating the touching and hugging, despite what he had told Eliza. The investigators were kind enough to refrain from commenting on Constance's body while I was there. Hey Dan, you don't have to watch this, one of them told me. We'll call you when it's all over. I went into the next room. Even though I knew what would happen, I couldn't watch it. I returned to the room just in time to hear Todd ask her about the money. It took her longer than we expected to answer him. It was almost as if she was contemplating what she should do. Baby, we really don't have time to bask in the afterglow, he said. How will I know I'll get my share of the money? She asked. All the agents in the room began to nod their heads. What is? I began. She just asked him about her share of the profits, the first agent said. While this is not an admission of guilt, it does indicate that she expects to make money from this. That's enough to bring some kind of charge against her, and probably enough to get her jail time. You can trust me, Constance, Todd said. You know me. I've been in love with you since college. You know I would never leave you. We'll end up getting married after all this. You're wearing my grandmother's ring. All this so we can be together. Why should I trust you to steal from me if the whole point of it is so we can get married and be together? He asked her. Where's the ring, Constance? I can't wear this ring at home, she said. Danford would have known about us. So what if he finds out? He'll find out soon anyway. So what percentage will I get? Constance asked, changing the subject. 40%, Todd said. So you're investing $50,000 yourself? Constance asked. Well, I'm not the only one, Todd said. I have other investors. The money is outside. Constance said. I'll give them to you when I leave in a few minutes. Todd looked shocked. What are you talking about, Connie? He asked. What do you mean, you're leaving in a few minutes? I thought you were staying with me. Todd, you know that's impossible right now, Constance said, starting to get dressed. You know I'm married. I'm married to a very rich, very powerful man. But I promise you that one day soon, I will return for good. She pulled away from him and smiled. Todd followed her to her car. He couldn't take his eyes off the car, but Constance treated it the same way she treated everything else. She opened the trunk and gave him a thin briefcase. She turned away from him and began to get into the car. Todd grabbed her hand and pulled her close to him. He kissed her passionately and hugged her. "I have to go, Todd," Constance said for the second time that evening. I watched Constance drive away. I saw Todd jump into the air. He looked like a teenager, not a man approaching 30. Todd ran back into the building, and we watched as Eliza walked out of one of the nearby apartments where she was visiting. As soon as they saw each other in the corridor, they started arguing again. "I got the money, baby," Todd said. "We'll be rich." "Did you have an intimate with her?" Eliza asked. Todd just looked at the floor. "I had to, baby," he said. "She was clinging to me. I couldn't say no." "I thought so," Eliza snorted. "Oh, baby, don't be like that." "It didn't mean anything to me," Todd said. "What do you mean?" asked Eliza. "It's just that she's going to be very unhappy," Todd laughed. "Remember when I picked off that drunk guy a couple of weeks ago?" Eliza nodded. "Besides $40, I got this cheap trinket from him that the pawn shop didn't even value at $5, Todd laughed. "I told her it was my grandma's ring and I wanted her to marry me. She bought into it all. By the time she tries to find me, we'll have already moved and lived somewhere else, so she won't get a penny from us," Todd said with contempt. "What if her husband hires someone to get his money back?" asked Eliza. "Here's the thing. She'll be so busy trying to hide what she did that she won't even think about looking for us. And she won't want him to find us, because if he finds us and finds out what she gave us money for, her ass is grass," Todd said. We all watched as Todd and Eliza started dancing. Todd's dance was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Strangely, when he opened the door, he saw a UPS delivery man. "Are you Todd?" asked the courier. Yeah," Todd said suspiciously. "I have a package for you from Mr. M." "Are you ready to take delivery?" asked the courier. "Yeah, wait, I need to consolidate my assets," Todd said. We watched on camera as Todd ran around the apartment, pulling money out from every corner. "Amateurs," the courier sighed. He looked around the room and shook his head as he watched Todd pull money from under the couch cushions and out of boxes. Finally, Todd ran up to him and handed him the briefcase on top of the neatly folded bills he received from Constance. He scrabbled his crumpled and wrinkled bills of various denominations. "Here," he said proudly. The courier just looked at him and at the briefcase with the corners and edges of banknotes sticking out from the sides. "Do the math, Todd," said the courier. "Everything is there, down to the last cent." The courier shook his briefcase and listened. "What are you doing?" Todd asked. "I wanted to see if there really were pennies in there. You seem like the type of person who would clean out his child's piggy bank for money. Anyway, here's your package," he said. "Aren't you going to count?" Todd asked, disappointed that the courier did not check if he had collected the full amount. It was as if he wanted someone to confirm that he had indeed raised $50,000. "No," said the courier. "It's not my job. We each have our specialties, and we don't mix them. The person on the other end has a whole team of specialists, each doing their own job. My job is only to deliver the goods, whatever they are, and accept payment. I do not know the contents of the boxes or their value. I only ship them both ways. There are others who count the cost and check the contents. If you are short by even a penny, there are other professionals who will hold you accountable for your errors. Although, I must caution you that failure to pay the full amount has already resulted in the closure of several accounts during my time with the company. What you're saying is that if I, the customer, underpaid by just a few dollars, they would never deliver to me again? That's absurd," Todd said. The delivery guy turned and started to walk away, and Todd closed the door. Back at the apartment where the agents were keeping watch, the head of the operation broke into a smile. "The plan," he shouted. "Take them now." All the agents around him, even me, were surprised by the change. "Don't you see?" he shouted. "Catching Todd and getting the goods before they hit the streets is not bad, but this courier is a direct link to Marinelli. If we get him to cooperate, we can get to Marinelli and keep most of the goods out of this country. Take him now, and make sure you catch this courier." I watched as the agents left the room, and the other agents scattered around the building all converged on Todd's apartment with multiple cameras and monitors. I could see what was happening both inside and outside the room. In the room, Todd opened a box and took out over 100 small packages. He smiled from ear to ear as he showed one of the packages to Eliza. Outside, at least 8 men gathered at the door of Todd's apartment, awaiting orders to break in. 2 men, the size of professional football players, were holding the handles of the battering ram. They were ready to put all their weight and strength into breaking down the door. There was no other way out of the apartment, but there were men outside monitoring all the windows just in case. "Go ahead," said the head of the operation, and the door was smashed to smithereens. Todd's eyes widened, and his mouth gaped as the agents burst into his room. He followed the agent's orders and lay down on the floor with his hands behind his head. I shook hands with the head of the operation. He thanked me for providing the agency with the evidence my private investigators had found, and I headed home. They never managed to catch the courier. He seemed to disappear, and there wasn't a single UPS truck nearby. This guy was a professional, whatever he was. I got out of bed again and wondered where the hell Danford was. He should have been home with me. I called his office several times looking for him. He didn't say a word about going out somewhere. He used to tell me where he was going and when he would return home. This night had already become a nightmare, and it only continued to drag on. I really needed Danford. I didn't need any adventure. I needed the arms of a man who loved me to embrace me and make me feel better. Ashley was right all along. First, she realized that Todd was the biggest mistake of my life. After I left, I saw Todd return to his house. I thought about the question I wanted to ask him. He didn't tell me when I would get my money, so I went back and followed him inside. It seemed like I was in such a hurry to get away from him after a terrible night that I just stopped asking questions. Then I realized that I had made a really big mistake. I returned just in time to see Todd and the beautiful Mexican woman starting to argue. What Todd said made me realize how stupid I was. It was exactly as Ashley told me. Todd only wanted me for the money. He had a night with me and put my marriage in jeopardy just to get me to steal money from a man who really loved me. Even what he told me about how much he loved me and wanted to marry me was a lie. The stamp on this was a ring that his grandmother supposedly had. It was so stupid that I started having feelings for Todd again. I never seriously considered leaving Danford for Todd, but she was so confused that she thought about it. It seemed like I was the kind of girl who wanted to be the center of attention and be loved and desired by everyone. Todd used this against me. The worst part about all of this is that Todd actually took advantage of me. He never intended to return the money. When Danford found out about the money, he would have to find out where it went. If I hadn't come up with a good scam, I might have been limited in how much I could spend. At worst, Danford might find out about Todd, and I might lose him. Sure, I would have gotten a big divorce settlement, but what I did would probably have been known, and I would have been a laughingstock in Texas. My dream world is now under threat. My new perfect life with Danford could be taken away from me. I became the beautiful wife of one of the richest and most successful men in the country, but my actions only showed that my new life hadn't really changed anything. I'm still the same girl I was before. It doesn't matter how much money we have or how important my husband is. I'm still the same little girl who tried to play big and fast with the rules and usually ended up getting screwed and being ridiculed. I'm not a big fan of alcohol, but I drank a glass of Danford's whiskey in one gulp. The alcohol burned down my throat, leaving me choking and wondering why Danford was even drinking it. I knelt down and prayed to some force in the universe that controls fate. I begged this divine entity to give me another chance to change my life and do the right thing. I vowed that I would become the best wife a man could ever have in the history of marriage. Even thinking about it, I realized that I had the opportunity to do this from the beginning, and that's what Danford tried to be with me. He never refused me anything, no matter how stupid or unreasonable my requests were. If I wanted it, I had it. Then I also realized that it went far beyond money. Danford was attractive enough to go out with my girlfriends if he wanted, but he never did. Danford had enough money to buy or seduce almost any woman, but he remained faithful to me. This only made my guilt worse. I fell asleep thinking about this. When I woke up the next morning, Danford was next to me in bed. I wished with all my heart that everything that had happened earlier was a nightmare, but I knew that it was a cruel reality. I wrapped my arm and leg around Dan's sleeping form. He muttered and turned to me. "You should try that now," he chuckled. "You tease me like that when you know we both don't have time for even a quickie, let alone the kind you really deserve, Danford." "We have our whole lives ahead of us," I said. "Forget about your work. Forget about your work. We have more money than we will ever need." "I thought that would be our motto after this deal," he said. "Remember our cruise, our retirement, our plan to have children. Although it would be a crime to distort such a body, no matter what shape it is, it will always love you," I said, and I noticed that he looked at me strangely. Then his expression was unreadable, but if I had to guess, I would think it was regret. He probably really wanted to stay home and stay in bed with me. Maybe everything will be okay. Sure, I messed up with Todd, but in the big picture of my life, Todd didn't really matter. He was just a small blip on the radar of my life and wasn't even that. Throughout our marriage, in 10 years, I won't even remember this man. I got out of bed and joined Danford in the shower. He wrapped his arms around me, and we hugged there while the water ran down our entwined bodies. I didn't care that I was late or that Danford was. I wanted this, and I will get it. But Danford gently pushed me away. "Honey, we need to take care of business," he said. "I know I've been very busy lately, but I want to take my time and take care of you. I want to relax and enjoy every second we spend together. In a few hours, we will have a lot of free time. I want to make love to you. To me, you should be the woman I love, not someone who meets a guy at a motel." He left me in the shower, and I still felt like everything was fine. However, deep down, I had a persistent feeling that just wouldn't let go. Danford left before me. I don't remember him ever leaving so early, but at least I knew everything was still okay between us. I will find a way to make it up to him, even if it takes my whole life. I got out of the shower and got dressed. I was a few minutes late. As I walked down the stairs, I noticed our caretaker talking to another man who was working at our front door. "Hyam, what is he doing?" I asked. "That's none of your concern, Mrs. Richards. Your husband wanted to change the locks on all the doors. It will take some time." "Have a nice day," he said. Dan didn't mention changing the locks at all. I went to the cafe. I wanted to have breakfast with my friends, and then I was getting ready to quit my job. I came up with something that would be more interesting for me to do. Dan hasn't had a new assistant for more than a few days. Maybe I could convince him to give her something else to do and let me be his assistant. I entered the cafe and saw my friends. I sat down at our table and started talking. "How was meeting your true love?" Ashley asked sarcastically. "Moreover, how was the intimate?" asked Betty. "Don't miss a single detail." Ashley just shook her head and turned away. "Constant, someday you will realize how happy you are and how well everything is going for you," Ashley said. "Oh my gosh, look who's back," Ava said, pointing to the door. She brought her child with her. "She probably wants the child to see professional waitresses in action, sort of like vocational training," Betty said. "Have you seen what she's wearing?" Ashley asked. "She's wearing the same blouse you wore yesterday, Constance." "I know I can't afford a blouse like that." I looked across the room, and Joanne was wearing the same designer blouse I wore yesterday, only hers was blue, and mine was red. "Whatever her new job is, she's probably doing it better than we thought," Ashley said. At this time, I noticed that 3 men and a woman entered the cafe. We were so busy staring at Joanne that we didn't even notice where they were going until they were right in front of us. "Which one of you is Connie Richards?" asked the first of the men. He stood closest to our table, and the other 2 men stood on either side as if making sure nothing happened. "What is your business?" asked Betty. "I'm Agent Joe Friday, Controlled Substance Enforcement Administration," the man said, showing his badge. "We need to see your IDs." "I'm Constance Richards," I said. "Is this about my husband?" "I noticed he was changing the locks on the doors when I left the house this morning. Is this some kind of security threat for us?" "No, madam, this is none of your husband's business. But perhaps you should call him and get a very good lawyer if you don't want to end up in jail," Friday said. "For what?" "For speeding? This is ridiculous." "I didn't do anything wrong," I said sharply. He nodded his head. "Madam, do you know Mr. Todd Bridges?" Friday asked. I nodded my head. "I know Mr. Bridges," I said. "Oh, really?" Betty said, laughing. I shot a glance in her direction. "Madam, last night Todd Bridges and his accomplice were arrested for possession of a controlled substance on a large scale. We've known about Bridges for a long time, but until now, he has always been a small fry, so we didn't worry about him. Suddenly, Todd was buying from big dealers and seemed to want to become a power player. We needed to find out where he got the money from. Such events. We didn't have to put any pressure on Todd to get him to talk. All we had to do was promise him a lighter sentence and he would come clean and blame you, madam. He told us the whole story about how you provided him with the money. He even told us how you stole money from your husband." I was shocked. "Apparently, madam, you are facing imprisonment. Todd named you as the main executive here because you provided most of the money. You may get a longer sentence than that. And then there's the fact that your husband will have to be notified and may even decide to charge you with embezzlement or outright theft of the money you stole," I exclaimed. "What? You're kidding, right? This must be a joke," I said sharply. "Madam, please hold your hands out in front of you," he said. I held out my hands, and the female agent handcuffed me. Suddenly, I noticed a bright flash of light and saw Joanne using her cell phone to photograph me as I was being led away in handcuffs. I was too shocked to react. I looked back at the table, and my friends were also shocked. Ashley stood up and told me that they would contact Danford for me and be there for me. She was sure Todd was trying to use me to save himself. Surprisingly, it was then that Ashley proved to me what a good friend she truly was. She never once said, "I told you so." I looked at my watch for the fourth time since I arrived at work. I arrived at least an hour earlier than usual. I left the house before Constance, so if she left her bag at home today, she'll have to deal with it herself. I assumed they would have arrested her by now, the DA agents. I was sure they would interrogate her for a while and then let her make a phone call. Constance was not a seasoned criminal, so she was unlikely to hold up well under interrogation. She would probably start crying, and her pretty face wouldn't stay pretty. Then I surprised myself. I didn't go to the cafe to see her being taken away. Just the thought of it made me feel sick. It seems my first instinct was still to try to protect her, even now. What kind of man did that make me? Was I some kind of weakling for still having feelings for a woman who clearly didn't care about me the way I deserved? She accepted all the love and everything else I gave her over the years, and what did she give me back? Okay, intimate, but you could buy that anywhere. After all, this is the 21st century, anything and everything is for sale. She gave me company. What she gave me was an illusion, the love she always claimed to have, the devotion I believed we shared, and even the vows we exchanged were non-existent. So yeah, she tricked me. I've done deals that made money on 4 continents and in more countries than I can list. I know a little bit of several different languages and can swear in them more than fluently. But Constance deceived me. I can sense when someone is trying to outsmart me in a business transaction. I can actually feel when it's time to cut my losses and walk away. At that moment, I felt it. I felt all the pain that any person feels, be it a CEO or an unemployed fast food worker, when the person we love most in the world not only does not return our feelings but prefers someone else and is simply using us to help this person. I have always been a winner in every aspect of my life, but I finally learned what it was like to be the underdog, to be in second place. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice anyone coming in until I heard Joanne's voice. She smiled like a Cheshire cat until she saw me. "What's happened?" she asked. "Constance," I began. My words faded, and my voice trembled. "The beginning of the end, perhaps." "I was there," she said quietly. "We talked about this. You knew this would happen. You planned this from the very beginning, remember? I took your lemons and made lemonade out of them. The problem is that lemonade tastes terrible, it's more bitter than I ever imagined. I thought it would be much sweeter. I wanted to make sure I took all my toys with me when we separated, and I did. The problem is that playing alone with your toys is no fun. Even as I said this, a single tear broke through my stoicism and rolled down my cheek. Joanne came up to me and hugged me. This was our first touch. "I hate this," she hissed. I hated her my whole life. No matter what happens, no matter what I do, she always finds a way to steal my joy, even now, even today, when seeing her being led away in handcuffs should have made me the happiest woman on the planet. I can't be happy about how it all made you feel. "Don't worry about me, Jojo," I said. "I always end up on top." Over the years, I've learned to make tough decisions, take the hits when necessary, and keep moving forward. The pain I feel now will subside over time, and I will no longer allow myself to be deceived. Maybe in time, you'll find someone else to share your toys with. She smiled sympathetically. "Maybe," I repeated. "But for a while, I'm not even going to look." I gave Constance everything I had, inside and out. I'm just too emotionally exhausted to even consider going through this again. "I know you care about me, Jojo, but for a while, can I just be by myself?" Joanne nodded and returned to her office. I admired her ability to put it behind her and get back to work. I was sure that I wouldn't be able to do much today, and that the evening would be even worse. About an hour later, Joanne came into my office. I looked up as she approached. "You never know who wants to see you," she said. I looked at her. "Ashley Wills is here," she said. "Ashley Wills?" I asked in faint surprise. "The one who went to school with me and your soon-to-be ex-wife?" She led Ashley into my office. Ashley looked at Joanne with eyes as big as saucers. Joanne closed the door behind her. "Danford, do you remember me?" she asked. "Of course," I smiled. "You're from Constance's gang, right?" Your secretary," I began. "Assistant," I corrected myself. I have 2 secretaries. They handle printing and archiving and other clerical tasks. Joanne does more of the work, planning and attending meetings with me, and reminding me of things. "But do you know who she is?" Ashley asked. "Yes," I said. "She's the woman you, Constance, and your friends have bullied and teased for most of your lives." "Well, yes, but..." Ashley began. "Ashley, did you come here to tell me about my assistant, or for some other reason?" I asked. "Did you know that Constance was arrested this morning?" she asked. "She may not have been allowed to make a phone call yet, but this morning she was taken away in handcuffs by several men in a cafe," I said. "Yes, I know about it." "Well, why aren't you there with a team of lawyers or something?" she asked. "Well, I was sure that Constance would probably prefer that Todd handle it," I said. "We both know that she cheated on me with him for longer than I suspected. We also know he wasn't the only one. I'm not even sure the trip you all took together to the islands that I paid for was the first. So, I'm going there with the lawyers, but not for the reason you expect. I'm guessing Connie might ask one of the guys she slept with to get her out of there." Ashley recoiled as if I had hit her. I returned my gaze to the papers on my desk and pretended to be interested in them. "You know she's just confused, and she actually loves you," she said. "Constance is still playing prom queen in her head, she just hasn't grasped adulthood yet. Most of this is your fault, Danford, you spoiled her. You always gave her everything she wanted. This made her start to think that the rules didn't apply to her. If you give her enough time, she will come to her senses. She's not really bad, she's just drawn like this." I interrupted. "I was going to say, I was confused," she said. "Think about it, Danford. She really needs your presence this time." A short time later, I walked out of my office to find Joanne sitting at her desk across from her daughter, Samantha. They had lunch together, and the girl's eyes widened when I left the office. She jumped off the chair, closed her legs together, and saluted me. "Why are you saluting me, darling?" I asked. "My dad was in the war," she said. "He died there. Mom said that you were in the war too. In war, they salute people who are responsible for something, and my mother said that you are responsible for making our lives better. Every time we have problems, you help us fix them." I returned her honor and smiled. "Would you like to have lunch with us?" she asked. "Not today, honey, but next time for sure," I said. I left the office. Joanne came running after me. "Sorry, Danford," she said. "I didn't think it would be a problem." She always asks me what I did at work and what the place was like, so. I raised my hand. "Jojo, you can bring Samantha with you anytime. She taught me a very important lesson today." After lunch, I called Stuart and had him come to the office with the documents I needed. I did what I needed to do when I really needed to think about something. I did it twice. I got into the car and just drove. The rumble of my powerful engine through the MagnaFlow exhaust system was music to my ears. The suspension on my racing car is so tight that I can feel every bump and crease in the road. The car drives as if it were on wires. Driving this car is like playing a video game. Everything is accurate and predictable. Even when I go into a corner too fast and the rear end flies out, I struggle with the steering wheel and the horse settles back into place. The big rear tires gripped the road again, and we're sharply back on course. Driving my Mustang makes all the bad things seem insignificant, so for a few moments, my mind is freed to consider my best course of action. I usually do this before entering a situation, to consider my options and my best path among all possible outcomes. I do this again after a situation, to see what my opponents have proposed and how it affects my end goal. In this case, a lot of money was at stake. This was not the same as deciding whether to close a plant to save money or invest more money into it to try to make it profitable. Here, the stakes were much higher, at least for me. My happiness and my peace of mind were at stake. Samantha reminded me of something I had forgotten. In the service, I learned to keep my head down and do my job, no matter what. The relationship I had with Constance turned into a war. She wanted to treat me badly and force me to accept things that were not in my best interest. I had to keep my head down and take care of myself and those around me, just like in war. I didn't want to kill, Instance. I just needed to get her out of my life before she did more damage to me. Surprisingly, a 4-year-old girl made me realize this. I had a chance. I could get rid of Constance now, and I could get rid of her without losing a ton of money. The question was, did I really want this? Maybe Constance really loved me. Was there a chance that what Ashley said was true? Was she just confused and needed some kind of shock to grow up? I had a hard time concentrating through my tears. I was in prison. I couldn't believe it. Todd blamed me for everything. The worst part was that he even used the CCTV footage we had on us to back up his words. When I asked how much of the profit was mine, it was seen as me demanding the majority of the money he would make from selling what turned out to be illegal substances. I actually gave him money. No one believed that I could be so stupid as to give him $30,000 without knowing what it would be used for. No one could be that stupid, but I was. I was stupid in many ways. I spent my days dreaming and spending money while Danford ran his companies. I enjoyed the fruits of his labor and spent his money much more than he did. What right did I have to do this? I only had the right because he gave it to me. He gave me this right because I am beautiful and he loves me. He worked hard so that I could spend money on frivolous and unnecessary things because he wanted me to be happy. And in response, I cheated on him. I cheated on him a lot because I was the prom queen, plus I'm smarter than everyone else. Now I understand that being prom queen has no value in the real world. I also see that I'm not as smart as I thought. Todd was smart enough to both have a night with me and get me to steal money for him. Danford was smart enough to understand what was happening with Todd. Ashley came to see me. She told me she went to Danford, and he already knew I was here. They probably contacted him or someone he knows works here. But Danford knew I was here and was trying to decide whether to leave me here to rot or not. The worst part about it all was that Joanne was there with Dan. The woman I had bullied and tried to humiliate or crush for most of our lives was now my husband's new personal assistant, and he never told me about it. No wonder she wore clothes similar to mine. I had a feeling that if I wasn't careful, she would wear more than just my clothes. She could carry my husband too. The camera didn't look like what I expected. It was just a very small room. There were no bars on the door, it was just a very thick steel door. I saw a face appear at the door, and then it opened. 2 men in DA uniforms entered my room and moved apart. One of them remained on the other side of the door, as if he expected me to try to escape. Behind them came what appeared to be two couples. Stuart Copeland, Danford's lawyer, followed by his assistant. Her name was Marissa or something. I met her a few times and never really bothered to remember her name. Then Joanne came in. She didn't smirk at me or laugh at me. She looked at me like a scientist looking at a beetle under a microscope. She didn't care about me at all. She was absolutely faithful to my husband, and I'm sure there was more to it than that. It really didn't seem like dedication to an employee. Even the way she positioned herself between Dan and me, as if ready to take a bullet for him, said a lot about how she felt about him. This really made me angry. "Oh, Dan," I said. "I knew you'd come for me, darling. If I wasn't handcuffed, I would have rushed to him to make me feel better. This is all a terrible mistake." I said, "You have to believe me," he said. Stuart walked forward and began to take papers out of his briefcase. He handed me a stack of documents for me to sign. "What is this?" I asked. "Divorce statement," I read. "These are divorce papers. I don't want to get a divorce." Dan looked at the agents and the people he brought into the room. "Can I be alone with my wife?" he asked. Everyone left. The agents seemed hesitant about whether they should agree to the request, but they left. Dan sat down on a chair by the door that was attached to the floor. I started talking as soon as the door closed. "Dan, I know it looks bad, but it's not what it seems. I know that you think that you should divorce me so that the scandal does not damage your reputation and does not affect your business." He raised his hand to silence me. "Forget about my reputation," he said. "I have enough money that I don't have to worry about what anyone thinks of me or you, for that matter, Constance. If I thought this was something we could handle, you'd already be out on bail, and my entire legal team would be working to get it overturned. But that's not true, Constance. I could forgive it overnight. You've been cheating on me for years. This thing with Todd is just the last straw. They have records and everything. Besides, you not only stole from me, but you accepted money from me under false pretenses. You used the money for other purposes. This is considered embezzlement or diversion, and since it is over $5,000, it is a criminal offense. So, even if the government doesn't continue its case, you will spend a long time in prison. I can't stay married to you, Constance. You disrespected me, you betrayed me, and you hurt me more than I could ever imagine. Everything is over. There's just no way to fix it. If you agree to the divorce, I will solve all your legal problems and give you enough money to start over wherever you choose. If you fight for a divorce, things will get ugly. None of us need this. Do we understand each other?" I was shocked. It was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. The man who spoke to me could not be my Danford, but he was. "It's all a mistake," I said. "No, it's not a mistake. The first time you slept with those guys, you were on borrowed time. Even when I heard about it, I didn't believe it at first. I needed to look at you to see if what I heard was true. I'll give you 24 hours to decide what you want to do," he said. "When I get home tonight, we'll talk about it." I said, "You're not coming home tonight," he said sharply. "I changed the locks this morning, so even if you get out, you won't have a home to go back to." "My friends are trying to find me a lawyer," I said. "They quit as soon as I told them," he said. I just looked at him. "I told them that first, I would inform their husbands about what happened during your trip to Jamaica several years ago," he continued. I was in shock, wondering how he knew about this. Then I explained to them that I was using every contact I had in business or anywhere to fire their husbands and make sure they were all left destitute. I will buy their mortgages and raise their rates to the point where they can't keep their homes and even kick their kids out of the schools they go to. "But Danford, you wouldn't do that to me," I said sadly. "I thought the same thing," he replied sharply. "I thought you would never do this to me." I lowered my head. "But I was wrong, wasn't I?" he said quietly. "Dan, I love you so much," I said. "I may have taken you for granted, but never doubt it." He smiled and shook his head. "You know, Constance, one of my favorite things about you has always been your eyes." "Your eyes are very special, Danford," I said. "I always thought it was something else that you liked," I smiled. "What's so special about my eyes?" I blinked them, trying to use everything I had. I felt Danford's resolve to get me out of his life weakening. "These are lying eyes," he said sharply. "When you tell a lie, you look away from me, whether it's because you spent too much money and you're embarrassed about it or because you did something you knew you shouldn't. You always do that. You smile and look away because you know I can read the lies in your eyes." "I wish I had noticed this sooner," he said. "Maybe I noticed it, but I never paid attention to it. You do this all the time, like when you tell me you love me and look away." "I'm not doing this," I cried, "and you're wrong. Maybe I do this when I know I did something wrong, as you said, but I really love you, Danford, isn't it?" He looked straight at me, and despite my best efforts not to, my gaze slowly moved to the floor, the ceiling, the walls, anywhere but his piercing gaze. "Yes, maybe you love me like a pet or a good butler," he said, "but not the way you love Todd and not the way you should love your husband." "But Danford," I cried again, my voice choked with emotion and broke off. "There is no way to hide your lying eyes," he said. He turned and simply walked out of the cell. I fell to the floor of the cell and just started crying. My life as I knew it was over. My perfectly pampered existence was over. Then I lost track of time, so I don't know how much time passed, but one of the agents came into the room to tell me that I had a phone call. "Hello," I said into the phone. "Constance, this is Ashley," she said. "I have to be brief. I can't help you anymore." "Why?" I asked. "Ash, you're one of my oldest friends," I said. "But, Constance, I also have a life to take care of," she said. "And there are two things you need to understand. First, Danford is not kidding. He showed up at my husband's work with his boss. He was considering buying the business where my husband works. Bill told me Danford asked him to say hi to me. Do you know who visited Betty's work? It was Joanne. She came on Danford's behalf. Betty even got to give her a tour. Joanne also mentioned that she wouldn't mind telling Ava's husband about Jamaica in person if we do anything against Danford, my dear. Our lives will be in the same state as yours. In fact, I shouldn't even be talking to you right now, Constance. I'm sorry to say this when you're in this position, but it's all your fault. I warned you to think about what you were doing and what the cost might be." But I hung up. In her long-winded and overly polite way, Ashley just said, "I told you so." I was in despair. Without oars, my boat was leaking. I only had one card left. I asked one of the agents to make a phone call. I called Danford at work. "Danford," I said into the phone. "I'll call him," answered a voice as cold as ice. "Hello," he said. "Danford, it's me, honey," I said. "You left me no choice," I said. "I'll sign the papers," I said. "I'll send Jojo with them now," he said. "Once you sign them, I will have Stuart start working on your case, and I will not press any charges or demand any money back from you. I will also cover the legal fees and give you 3 days to collect your belongings from my house." "But, Danford, where should I go?" I asked. "Anywhere," he said. "As long as it's away from me." Before I could say anything else, he added, "You can stay in the house for one night. I'll make Jojo write you a check." "Danford, could you get someone else to do this?" I asked. In the days following Danford's divorce, I took on even more responsibilities. I hated Connie for what she did to him. Connie has always been more man than woman. She was always the type of person who, if you gave an inch, would take 12 miles. Danford was kind enough to let her stay at his house. The day the divorce papers were signed, she immediately started calling to ask when he would be coming home. In the following days, she began to almost stalk him with calls. He never answered them. I answered all the calls and made sure she understood that he wanted nothing more to do with her. I knew that sooner or later, she would run out of money and she would have to do something to survive. Connie didn't have the skills to get a job. She started reaching out to all her old friends who still talked to her, but to no avail. The women in her so-called gang were afraid to help her because they knew what could happen to them. She tried to return home to her parents, but soon returned to the city. Danford generously gave her enough money for the small family to survive for several years. She blew most of the money in less than 6 months. She then began a campaign to get Danford back. Having failed in this, she began courting other wealthy men in the area. Most of these men had contact either with Danford himself or with someone who knew him. It didn't take long before she acquired a very bad reputation. Over time, Connie became known as a woman who did things for money. But now she's just a. Even Ashley, Betty, and Ava don't talk to her anymore. Not because of Danford, but because of what she looks like and who she has become. My situation was much worse. I fell in love with a man when I was young, and we had a child. When he was taken from us at such a young age, I thought I would never recover. Over time, I met another very unusual man, and although no one knows it, I fell in love with him too. I found myself in another impossible situation because his heart was broken, and what was left of it was so scarred that getting through to him would be difficult, if not impossible. There were times when I looked at him and wondered if he would ever notice me. He didn't even seem to pay attention to women of any age. Connie really hurt him bad, but then that's only fair, since her main mission in life seemed to be to ruin my life. However, of course, there was one woman who held Danford in the palm of her hand. But this did not help me at all. I even tried going out with different guys to see if it would make Danford jealous, but there was no sign yet. I could probably marry some guy, and he would only even ask about it if it affected our work schedule. My best hope was that emotionally, Danford was in shock over what Connie did to him, and he would eventually come out of it, and I would be there. I didn't go home that evening. I called home to make sure Constance would be allowed in one last time. Since the confrontation was over and all cards were on the table, I saw no reason to see her again. I assigned Stuart to handle the divorce and all of her legal issues. All the tapes they had proved that she didn't actually know what Todd was trying to do. Because I didn't press charges for the money she took, she ended up getting probation and time in custody. I think it was a good lesson for her. I know it was a good lesson for me. In the months that followed, my life changed. I became tougher and even more businesslike. I threw myself into my work to the exclusion of everything else. I was named one of the most eligible bachelors in Texas and the country. I was constantly bombarded with invitations to parties and events, and I turned down almost all of them. I was turned off by the concept of marriage and even relationships in general. Once a month, I spent a weekend in Las Vegas. It was better this way. Whenever I had to appear at a dinner or event, Joanne accompanied me. We were in the same boat, or so it seemed to me. I gave up on marriage because my first marriage was terrible, and I didn't want to go through that kind of pain again. Almost every woman I met reminded me of Constance in one way or another, and I was simply afraid to risk that kind of pain again. Joanne, on the other hand, was in the same boat, but for different reasons, at least that's what I thought. I thought her first marriage to a man who truly loved her was perfect. I thought her problem was that no man could ever match the memory of her first husband. She dated several men, but nothing serious came of it. I also went on constant dates almost every Friday night and sometimes Saturday afternoon. And I don't seem to have learned my lesson. This young lady was even younger than Constance, but Joanne approved of her, so she couldn't be that bad. I looked at her across the table, and her face lit up. Her eyes were clear, and she met my gaze. "What do you want me to bring you?" I asked. "Where are you driving?" she asked. "I'm going to Vegas again," I said. "Should be back by Sunday evening." "Do you really want me to be happy?" she asked. "Of course, Sammy." "You know that," I said. She frowned, and her 7-year-old face looked at me. "Then don't go," she said. "Why would you even go to Las Vegas?" "Well, I'm, relaxing there," I said. "Why can't you just relax here?" she asked. "Oh, what I do there to relax, I really can't do here," I said. "Why don't you want me to leave?" "Because every time you go to Las Vegas, my mom cries the whole time you're there," she said, every time she shoved a huge spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. I started thinking about what she said. Then I realized that perhaps my trips were unfair. While I was away, JoJo always managed all my business interests herself. It was a lot of work and a lot of responsibility entrusted to one person. I decided to talk to her about this after I dropped Samantha back at daycare. I walked into my office. I called Calvin Preston into my office. He came in and was clearly nervous. Cal, relax, I said. It's not official, it's personal. He became even more nervous. He couldn't seem to sit still. Cal, I began. Yes, Mr. Richards, he replied quickly. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. We didn't want to get in trouble or lose our jobs, that's why we didn't invite you. We both love working here, he said quickly, looking even more nervous and twirling his hands. Cal, I said slowly, take a breath and tell me what you're talking about, Mr. Richards. I'm marrying Barbara Stevenson next Saturday. I wasn't sure if we had a policy about spouses working together, so we didn't say anything. We need both of our jobs to get by. Congratulations, I said. Everything is fine until we need to introduce some kind of policy on this. But weren't you dating Joanne for a while? He looked at me as if I was the one who didn't understand. Mr. Richards, I dated Joanne, but we only went out as friends. She used me to drive away annoying people. Besides, she already has someone, I asked. You, he said. How long has she worked here? Joanne is crazy about you, everyone knows this. I was shocked. I walked away from him shaking my head. I wondered why I hadn't heard about it. I spoke to one of the workers who had worked for me since the building was built. Hey Ari, I said as I passed him in the hallway. Have you ever thought about dating Joanne? She's really beautiful, isn't she? Yes, and she has a great figure, he said, but why do you ask? Are you going to let her go? Just wondering, I said. I finally walked into my own office, and Joanne stood up and walked towards me. Your flight is at gate 8 at 6:30. You're staying at the Bellagio. I raised my hand. Jojo, do you really cry when I leave for Vegas? I asked. I'll kill Sammy, she said. That girl has you in the palm of her hand, but I don't want her interfering in your life. But are you crying? I asked. She didn't say anything. I just sat on her chair and pointed to another chair. Jojo, I'm going there too. I know why you go there, Danford, she said. A big tear rolled down her cheek, and I wiped it away. Danford, I do everything for you. I plan your meetings, make homemade food when you want it, accompany you when you need to appear at an event. My daughter thinks you are her uncle, Dad, because every time she has an event at school, you are there. The only woman you're actually dating is my 8-year-old daughter. And yes, Danford, I've been in love with you for years. I would do anything for you. Every time you go to Las Vegas, it hurts me, and I cry. But I'm an adult, I'll get over it. I know Constance hurt you a lot, so you may never want to try another relationship, but I would never do that. Even if we don't have a relationship as such. I just don't understand why. She paused as if trying to find the words. Then she gathered her courage and blurted out, if you want intimate with someone, why can't it be me? She asked defiantly. I expected her to try to hide her face or look away like Constance always did, but she didn't. She stood up and stared me straight in the eyes. I was amazed. Even though it was my office, I ended up leaving. I had a lot to think about. As usual, I got in my Mustang and went for a ride. This time, as the miles passed, I did not see my stress decrease. I was angry. I was very angry, but at myself. I felt like I was missing something very important. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a building that was familiar. I left the highway and pulled into a parking lot. After a few minutes, I remembered when and why I had been here before, and I had an idea. I checked in at their front desk and asked for Mrs. Grail. The security guard called her office, and a few minutes later, a nervous Betty came out to meet me. Ah, Mr. Richards, she said. Please allow me to show you to my office. As soon as we got to her office, her fear took over. I didn't do anything, she began. I had no contact with Constance. She's not the same anymore. I don't communicate with such people. I need my job, Betty, calm down, I said. This is not about Constance. I just needed to talk to someone about something. Something God-woman, Constance and I divorced almost 3 years ago. Why should I care if you see her? You're supposed to be her friend, right? Well, when you first divorced her, she began. I'm really sorry about that, I said. It was an intimidating trick. Constance hurt me a lot, and I needed to get rid of her without losing a ton of money. I know it was petty, but why should I pay her because she cheated on me? Okay, Betty said. What do you want to talk about? She seemed a little less nervous, but only a little. Oh, Joanne, I said. She tensed again. Why did you tense up when I mentioned her name? I asked. Joanne is scary, she said. When she came here to pick you up 3 years ago and had my boss make me give her a tour, she looked me in the eye, and I knew she was thinking about firing me or something. Why would Jojo do that? I asked. Because I probably deserve it, Betty said. We treated Joanne horribly when we were in school and college. I looked at her in surprise. Constance, Ava, Ashley, and I were kind of a clique. We started out as cheerleaders and somehow took over the school. Anyone who wanted to be popular in school had to do everything the way we wanted, otherwise, we would simply reject them. Joanne tried to become a cheerleader. She did gymnastics and could do all these somersaults and everything. She was nice too, she could easily make the team. So Joanne was a cheerleader with you? I asked. No, Betty smiled nervously. Joanne had a big problem. Which one? I asked. She refused to cave in, Betty said. Think about it, she was nice, she was good, and knew how to do all those somersaults. She could probably be the head cheerleader, develop routines, and all that. The rest of us weren't so serious, it was just about getting out in front of the crowd and getting noticed. For us, it also gave us the right to wear that little skirt and make all the guys go crazy for us. Constance wasn't going to let someone with a chance unseat her. From then on, she blocked every chance Joanne had to get into any of the teams or clubs. She even went so far as to publicly humiliate the girl at every opportunity. And when she married you and Joanne came along a few years later as a waitress, it got even worse. Constance constantly found ways to belittle Joanne. Most people would grow out of this, but not Constance. In fact, we are all women who grew up in this area and went to the same schools. You'd think we'd all be friends, including Joanne, after your divorce. I really expected Joanne to take revenge on Constance for everything, but she never did. I saw her and her daughter from time to time in the cafe in the morning. Several times, I was tempted to go over and say something to her, maybe apologize or just say hi. But too much water has passed under the bridge, and now that she could easily come here and use her connection with you to force my boss to kick me out of here, I'm afraid of angering her. I think we're all especially afraid of her because we feel really bad about the way we treated her. Besides that, I said, does Joanne look like Constance? What do you mean? She asked. Betty, you know how Constance played with me and lied to me. Joanne, Danford. Joanne only had one boyfriend all through high school, as far as I know. She married him, and then he just disappeared somewhere. I've never heard how or why, but she definitely doesn't look like Constance, she said. Thank you, Betty, I said, and please tell your friends that I wish them all the best, whether they remain friends with Constance or not. In fact, I hope Constance finds happiness too. Around us, people began to pack their things and leave. I didn't realize our conversation had lasted so long. I made a couple of quick stops and found myself in front of Joanne's condominium. I knocked on her door and found myself face to face with Samantha. Hi, Uncle Dan, she smiled. I know what's behind your back. It's pizza, isn't it? Give it to me, Sammy. Why are you opening the door? Joanne began walking into the room. She was wearing long shorts and a sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back like the cheerleader she must have been when she was younger. Her eyes opened wide in surprise. Danford, why aren't you in Las Vegas? She asked. Did you miss the plane? I handed her the bouquet of flowers I bought. She looked at them and smiled. You were crying again, I said. I can't stop it, she said. Do you need a new reservation, Joanne? I didn't miss the plane, I said. I just had to do something more important today than go to Vegas. So you'll go tomorrow, right? She asked. What did you need to do? This, I said. I crossed the room and hugged her. Then I kissed her harder than anyone in my life. I wiped the tears from her eyes and saw her smile. Is anyone else going to eat pizza? Samantha asked. We have to figure something out with her or wait until she falls asleep, Joanne said. It took you a long time, she said mockingly, hugging me back. I've been with you every damn day since you got divorced. But I think I loved you before that. I think I became a little infatuated with you when you suddenly appeared out of nowhere and paid all my bills while I was pregnant. Why are you hugging? Samantha asked as she walked into the room with her face covered in pizza sauce. Dan finally realized that he loves me, Joanne smiled. He really does, I interjected. Oh God, everyone already knew that, Samantha said, showing a 7-year-old's intuitive understanding of the obvious. You could ask me, I would have told you. Did you say love? Joanne asked. Let me look you in the eye when you say that. For what? I asked. You can't hide your lying eyes, she said. Darling, you cannot hide your lying eyes. I just started laughing. I wish I had known about this with Constance, I said. I'm glad Constance didn't know about it, she said. If she knew, maybe she would still be with you. That day marked the beginning of the rest of our lives. We grew old together and had 2 more children. All I know is that my life got better, and I was happy again. Life goes on. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the wife is absolutely wrong and should not have cheated on her husband with another man. It violates the vows they made to each other during their marriage. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.